Hello everybody and welcome to the Digital SAT Reading and Writing course. Today's lesson is going to be on logically completing the text. So I have a lot of examples, so let's just hop straight into it. First of all, what can you expect to see on one of these questions? So a question that asks you to complete the text will obviously have a prompt, which will follow a normal progression, a break in that prompt, where you will then be asked to fill in the broken segment with the most logical word or phrase. So to be able to most efficiently answer these questions, you're going to need to be able to read the prompt carefully because sometimes individual details within the prompt are going to be important to answering the question logically. You're going to have to determine which idea is unfinished so you can put in something that would finish that idea. And of course, once you've decided on something, you should try out your selection and see if it makes sense. I have a few examples here, so let's just try them out. Example 1. Although military veterans make up a small proportion of the total population of the United States, they occupy a significantly higher proportion of the jobs in the civilian government. One possible explanation for this disproportionate representation is that military service familiarizes people with certain organizational structures that are also reflected in the civilian government bureaucracy, and this familiarity thus blank. So let's check some of the answer choices. Which choice most logically completes the text? This question is talking about explanations for disproportionate representation in the civilian government, and they think it's because certain organizational structures are reflected in the civilian government bureaucracy, and this familiarity thus makes civilian government jobs especially appealing to military veterans. This question does logically complete the text. It seems like something that you could complete the text with because they would be familiar with the bureaucracy, and that would make them more open to taking a job that has a familiar structure. Let's look at B. Alters the typical relationship between military service and subsequent career preferences. So this actually would, if you think about it, altering the typical relationship would decrease your familiarity, so we can immediately eliminate B. C says it encourages non-veterans applying for civilian service government jobs to consider military service instead. This isn't talking about applying for civilian government jobs, it's talking about people who would apply considering military service instead. But we're talking about people who used to serve in the military taking up civilian government jobs. So C is also incorrect. D says increases the number of civilian government jobs that require some amount of military experience to perform. But this relationship doesn't increase the number of jobs, it increases the number of veterans taking these jobs. So increasing the number of jobs we know is incorrect. So this would make A the correct answer here because we're talking about the familiarity of the civilian government bureaucracy, and that makes the job appealing to military veterans since they are more familiar with this bureaucracy. Let's move on. The increased integration of digital technologies throughout the process of book creation in the late 20th and early 21st centuries lowered the costs of book production, but those decreased costs have been most significant in the manufacturing and distribution process, which occurs after the authoring, editing, and design of the book are complete. This suggests that in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, blank. So they're talking about the increased integration of digital technologies throughout the process of book creation lowered the cost of book production. Those decreased costs have been most significant in the manufacturing and distribution process, which occurs after the authoring. So, of course, logically, you would think that these lowered costs are happening in the manufacturing and distribution process, not in the authoring and editing. So let's look at some of the questions. A says, digital technologies made it easier than it had been previously for authors to write very long works and get them published. Now, we know that this does not logically complete the text because it says that the increased integration of digital technologies lowered the costs of book production, but not authoring, editing, and design. So A would be incorrect because it's talking about authoring becoming easier, which is not what the text is talking about. B says, customers generally expected the cost of books to decline relative to the cost of other consumer goods. This is talking about customers, but the text is talking about lowering the cost of book production through increased integration of digital technologies in the manufacturing and distribution process. This would eliminate B because it's talking about customers expecting the cost of book to decline relative to other consumer goods, but this is exclusively about the book production and the integration of digital technologies. So this does not complete the idea that the text is trying to imply. This is instead talking about a different aspect of the integration of digital technologies, decreasing the cost of books. So B would be incorrect. C. Publishers increased the variety of their offerings by printing more unique titles, but also printed fewer copies of each title. So if we think about this is talking about variety of offerings by printing more unique titles, but fewer copies. This is an idea that is not developed inside of the prompt here. Once again, it's talking about decreasing costs of the manufacturing and distribution process, which, as we can see here, is never mentioned in C. So this would not complete the idea. D. The costs of writing, editing, and designing a book were less affected by the technologies used than were the costs of manufacturing and distributing a book. This directly relates to our claim right here when it says, of course, once again, that the integration of digital technologies decreased costs of book production in the manufacturing and distribution process, which is exactly what it's saying right here. So therefore, D would be the most logical statement to complete the text. Let's go to question number 3. Euphorbia isula, leafy spurge, is a Eurasian plant that has become invasive in North America, where it displaces native vegetation and sickens cattle. E. esula can be controlled with chemical herbicides, but that approach can also kill harmless plants nearby. Recent research on introducing engineered DNA into plant species to inhibit their reproduction may offer a path toward exclusively targeting E. esula, consequently, blank. Let's check out A. A says, consequently, making individual E. esula plants more susceptible to existing chemical herbicides. Okay, so the text is giving the idea that engineered DNA inhibits reproduction. The DNA inhibits reproduction. It doesn't say anything about the herbicides inhibiting reproduction. It's talking about DNA here. Herbicides are mentioned earlier, but we switch to DNA. So we know that A is incorrect because it's talking about an idea that we've already passed. B. Enhancing the ecological benefits of E. esula in North America. Once again, our idea is not talking about enhancing ecological benefits, it's talking about DNA inhibiting reproduction. Very straightforward. So we know that B is also incorrect. C. Enabling cattle to consume E. esula without becoming sick. Right off the bat, we know this is incorrect because it doesn't have anything to do with DNA and inhibition, it's talking about cattle. D. Reducing invasive E. esula numbers without harming other organisms. So, of course, this one relates better because inhibiting reproduction with DNA would obviously reduce invasive E. esula numbers because we are inhibiting their reproduction, and this wouldn't harm other organisms because it's specifically targeting E. esula. So therefore, D would be the correct answer here. Let's move on to number 4. Among social animals that care for their young, such as chickens, macaque monkeys, and humans, newborns appear to show an innate attraction to faces and face-like stimuli. Elisabetta Versace and her colleagues used an image of 3 black dots arranged in the shape of eyes and a nose or mouth to test whether this trait also occurs in testudo tortoises, which live alone and do not engage in parental care. They found that tortoise hatchlings showed a significant preference for the image, suggesting that blank. Let's analyze the text real quick to get an idea of what's going on. They're wondering if an animal that lives alone and does not engage in parental care would also show preferential behavior towards faces and face-like stimuli. So what they did basically is they put 3 black dots arranged in the shape of eyes and a mouth and found that tortoises, although they don't engage in parental care when they're growing up, they still showed a significant preference for the image. What does this suggest? Let's see. Face-like stimuli are likely perceived as harmless by newborns of social species that practice parental care, but as threatening by newborns of solitary species without parental care. Now, remember, this actually does not have to do with the idea of the article. The article is arguing that solitary species do show preference for facial images, even though they don't get raised by their parents, like social animals do. So we know that A would be incorrect. B. Researchers should not assume that an innate attraction to face-like stimuli is necessarily an adaptation related to social interaction or parental care. This one does relate to the article, and it relates because they initially thought that the attraction to face-like stimuli was due to innate attraction to face and face-like stimuli due to social animals caring for their young. So they believed that this comes from the fact they were raised. But upon testing the fact that some animals that don't engage in parental care still show preference for facial images would disprove their idea, which would make B the correct answer here. But let's see why C and D are wrong. C. researchers can assume that the attraction to face-like stimuli that is seen in social species that practice parental care is learned rather than innate. So, we have to think maybe a little bit critically about this one. But they say that attraction to face-like stimuli is learned and not innate, but why would the testudo tortoise be attracted to it if its parents did not raise it like a social animal would? If it was solitary, it wouldn't be around these parental figures to learn attraction to this face-like stimuli. So we know that C is incorrect because the tortoise's attraction to face-like stimuli must have been innate because it didn't have an upbringing like a social animal would. D. Newly hatched testudo tortoises show a stronger preference for face-like stimuli than adult testudo tortoises do. The reason why D is incorrect here is because there's no comparison here being made between newborn and older tortoises. It's just talking about social versus solitary animals here. So we know that D is incorrect. Some final notes before we wrap up the lesson. We need to make sure that we understand the prompt and understand the flow of ideas so that we know what they're trying to argue, the point they're trying to make, so that we can, of course, logically complete the idea that they're trying to get across. Okay, so that's why we need to analyze and see where the break in the passage occurs so that we can complete the idea they're trying to give. Remember, this break doesn't have to be at the end. It could be somewhere in the middle of the prompt, but you still have to be able to complete the idea. 3. You have to think logically to yourself which phrase would continue the flow of the idea. Remember, the idea should be completely normal. If we're going to switch ideas, that will be its own thing. That's a transition, but we're trying to complete the idea here. We're not trying to switch up the idea, we're just trying to complete the idea that they're trying to get across. So make sure that we logically think of a way that we can do this and pick something that makes sense, which is number 4, just testing it out. Make sure that the idea still makes sense and that the ideas are justified in a way that, of course, is logical. Thank you for watching this video. I really hope it helped you out. If you would like me to go a little bit more in depth, then please just leave a comment. I would love to make another video about this. And also please subscribe. It helps me make more free videos for you all. And please stay tuned for more in the future. Good luck on your SATs.